Hello, friends. Tonight's story isn't about Viking glory or burning monasteries or the thunder of oars on foreign shores. It's about something the sagas left out, something colder, something quieter. Because when we think of the Vikings, we think of fury. Longships slicing through mist, axes splitting shields, and warriors who feared nothing. They plundered, they conquered, they vanished into the wild reaches of the world, and came back with songs and silver. They were, we're told, unstoppable. But what if, not quite, what if the fiercest men in Europe, the storm on every coastline, still had places they avoided, not because they were defeated, but because they were unsettled, because the people they met in those dark corners of the world didn't fight like warriors. They didn't fight at all. They waited, they watched, and they changed something in the men who met them. This isn't a tale of blood and banners. It's a story whispered in the dark. The kind men tell only when the fire is low, and the wind outside carries voices that shouldn't be speaking. Because even legends cast shadows, and even Vikings had nightmares. Imagine yourself on a longship. The sky is grey, the clouds low and indifferent. Mist clings to the river like breath on cold glass. You've been rowing for hours now, maybe days. The forest on either side is dark, tangled, unfamiliar. The kind of place where light doesn't reach the forest floor. There's no coastline here, no clear view. Just tight river bends and overhanging branches, the occasional splash of a fish or something beneath the surface. You're not alone. You and 20 others, maybe 30, crowd the boat. Most of you are armed but tired. Some are young, eager. Others have seen too many winters, and somewhere ahead is supposed to be a monastery. A soft target, gold chalices, silver crosses, maybe even a few terrified monks who'll beg you not to burn their books. But you don't see it. You see fog. You see shadows. And then a whistle, not from the crew, high-pitched, unnatural. Then another, and another. The arrows come before the voices, thin shafts from the tree line, almost silent. One strikes the prow. Another lodges in the neck of the man 2 benches down from you. He jerks, surprised, blinks, dies. Panic starts to simmer. You draw your axe, but at what? There's no enemy in sight. Just smoke curling through the trees. Just birds rising in the distance, startled. And you realize someone knows you're here. Someone who's been watching for hours. You press on. What choice do you have? The river's too narrow to turn, too shallow to dock. The trees lean in above you, gnarled and dripping, like old men listening for secrets. You keep rowing. The men are muttering now. One of them, an older man with silver in his beard, whispers a name you don't recognize. A local god, maybe. A spirit of the trees. Another begins to pray. Not to Odin, not out loud, just under his breath. You're not supposed to pray when you're the predator. But the fog, it doesn't lift. It thickens. It clings to your skin. It mutes the world. The oars don't splash. They whisper. The banks close in like ribs. The air is wet, choking. You've lost track of where the sky ends and the river begins. Suddenly, a shout, this time from the rear. Another boat, part of your warband, has stopped moving. You turn just in time to see it drift, empty, oars floating. No crew, no splash, no struggle, just gone. You hear your leader shout something, rallying the men, promising riches, but even his voice sounds thin in the mist. That's when the drums start. Not your drums. Not your rhythm. A low, slow pounding, dull as thunder beneath the earth. Somewhere ahead, or maybe behind, you hear it rise. Thum, thum, thum. It doesn't sound like a call to war. It sounds like a warning. The river winds again, tighter now, pressing your longship into awkward turns. The hull scrapes against unseen rocks beneath the surface. Each scrape sounds louder than it should. Every creak and crack echoes in the stillness like a threat. The fog clings tighter to your skin. It beads on your lashes, seeps through your furs, and settles in your lungs like damp wool. Even the fire-hearted among your crew have stopped speaking. There's no bird song, no animal cry, just water, wood, and those slow, distant drums. Your fingers tighten around the shaft of your axe. You were told this raid would be easy. A monastery, a village maybe. No defenses, no walls. You expected a flight, not a fight. You expected terrified monks clutching their books, offering coins and relics. Instead, you got this. You glance at the man beside you. His knuckles are white on the oar, his eyes rimmed in red. He's not seasick, he's afraid. And he's not the only one. One of the younger men, just 16 maybe, begins to cough. It's not a loud cough. It's the kind that comes from somewhere deeper. He spits into the river. The phlegm is dark. He hides it. But you see, he's not the only one. A sickness is blooming quietly among your crew. Not enough food, stale water, wounds that haven't healed. Fear works its way into the body like rot. And worse, the forest hasn't stopped watching. You feel it. That oppressive weight, like eyes in every branch. You see no movement, but you know you're being tracked. You hear a twig snap once, and half the crew looks up, weapons drawn. But there's nothing. Then you hear something stranger. Whispers, not loud, not clear, just fragments carried on the fog. Your name, maybe, or a word that sounds like it. You try to ignore it, but it happens again. And this time, you're not sure it's just the wind. You reach a clearing, a wide spot in the river, shaped like a pool. The water is still, too still, like glass. You slow the boat. The oars lift, dripping. On the far bank stands a stone structure. Not a monastery, not a village. A single standing stone, carved with symbols you don't recognize. Circles, spirals, a jagged face. It watches the river like a sentinel. The older man mutters something. One of the others grabs his arm. "Don't speak their names," he hisses. No one tells you who they are. And still, the drums beat. Thum, thum, thum. Somewhere farther up the river, behind a veil of trees, your leader raises his hand. He means to move forward. But your gut tells you something different. Your ancestors told stories of cursed rivers, of ghost forests, of lands where the dead didn't stay dead. You didn't believe them, not really. But now you start to wonder why this place isn't marked on the maps. Why the locals warned you not to come inland. Why the other crews, the ones who tried last spring, never sent word back. And still, the fog clings. Still, the whispers float. Still, the river pulls you deeper. You haven't even reached land yet. And already, you're beginning to understand why no Viking came back from here unchanged. You push on. You tell yourself there must be something ahead. A village, a shrine, a storehouse fat with barley and silver. You tell yourself the silence is just wilderness, that the whispers are just imagination. But the fog disagrees. It thickens, then thins, then thickens again. Shapes shift in it. Trees lean closer, but when you blink, they're gone. You're losing your grip on distance, time, maybe even direction. Then the arrows return. This time, they come without warning. A shriek, not human, cuts the air like a blade, and suddenly, the sky hisses. You raise your shield in time to catch one. Another thuds into the wooden hull near your foot. The man behind you isn't so lucky. He cries out, not loud, and falls into the bottom of the boat, clutching his side. The others scramble for cover. Some try to row faster. Others shout into the woods, but there's nothing to shout at. You see no enemy, just trees and smoke and fog. Then, from the left bank, movement. A flicker, a robe, a cloak. You're not sure. It's gone before you can call it out. But you heard something, a muttered chant, a song maybe. Low and rhythmic, not joyful, a funeral rhythm. You don't know what language it's in, but it's not Norse. Another volley rains down. The man at the prow takes 3. His body topples into the river. His hand rises once, as if grasping for the sky, then disappears below the surface with barely a ripple. Your leader shouts to abandon the boats. Get to land, he cries. But land is no safer. The banks are steep, muddy, lined with thorns and strange dark brush. As you leap over the side, your boots sink. The water is colder than it should be, colder than the sea. Your feet find no purchase. And then the screaming starts. Not all at once, not in panic. One voice at a time, short, sharp, silenced. You turn to see one of your brothers vanish into the reeds. Another stumbles, tripping over something. No, someone. Bodies, not fresh. Weeks dead, maybe months. Others have come this way before. You're not the first. And judging by the bones half buried in the mud, you won't be the last. Still ahead, that rhythm continues. Drums, whispers, soft chanting. They don't fight like you do, not in the open, not face to face. They fight like the land fights, slowly, quietly, with rot and roots and silence. You realize now, this was never a raid. This was a trap, a ritual maybe, or just a punishment. Because whoever lives in these woods, by this river, they don't just want to kill Vikings, they want to erase them. You regroup with what's left of your crew, maybe 10 of you now, maybe fewer, mud-soaked, shivering, eyes darting at every sound. Your shields are slick with dew and blood. Your hands tremble, not from cold, but from something deeper, something older. You set up a crude camp beside the river. Not to sleep, no one's sleeping now, but to rest, to count losses, to light a fire, even if the smoke will give you away. But you quickly learn, smoke doesn't rise here. It hangs, low, choking, heavy as wet cloth. The fire sputters and flickers like it's struggling to survive, just like you. Someone asks if they should turn back, try the boats again. Someone else admits, quietly, they don't know where the boats are anymore. The river shifted behind you. The fog swallowed the shore, even the standing stone. Gone. One man, Roald, a broad-shouldered fighter from the coast of Jutland, begins to mutter to himself, just a name, over and over. Not his own, not a name you know. You try to ask him, but he doesn't answer. Eventually, he stops talking, just stares. That night, or what passes for night, you post a watch. Not that it helps. By morning, he's gone. No sign of struggle, no prints in the dirt. His axe still lies beside the cold fire, his bedroll still warm. One of the men swears he heard footsteps in the water just before dawn, but no one saw anything. You keep moving, not toward anything, just away. Away from the stone, away from the river, away from that sound, those drums that still echo faintly from somewhere deeper in the woods. Part 6. The thing in the fog. The forest opens just slightly, enough to make you think the worst is behind you. You come upon a clearing, wide, ringed with old trees, their roots like claws curling through the earth. In the center stands a ruined chapel, stone walls half sunk into the ground, as if the forest is trying to pull it back under. You enter carefully, weapons drawn. Inside it's dark, colder than outside. The air smells wrong, not of death exactly, but age, like something buried too long. You find symbols on the walls. Some are Christian, a cross here, a broken icon there, but others are not. Spirals again, eyes, shapes carved deep into stone, worn smooth by time and fingertips, and blood, old, dark, crusted in the grooves. You don't speak of it. No one does. At the center of the chapel is a stone basin. You expect water, but it's dry. Inside it lies something wrapped in cloth. You don't touch it. None of you do. You leave. But one of the men stays behind a few seconds too long. When he joins you outside, he won't meet your eyes. That night, he dreams aloud. You wake to hear him speaking, not in Norse, not even in any tongue you know. His voice is soft, but not his own. It goes on for hours, and when dawn breaks, he doesn't. There's nothing left to do but run. You don't say it aloud. No one does. But the fight is gone. The hunger is growing. The sickness is spreading. And the forest is too quiet. You've stopped asking where your comrades are. You already know the answer. The land took them, one by one. Some vanished during watch. Others simply wandered off, not in panic, not in haste, just like they heard something calling. You stopped chasing them after the third. Now, it's only you and two others. One limps. The other won't speak at all. You try to find the river again, the one you came up, thinking it would deliver you to gold and soft conquest. But when you find it, it's not the same river. The banks are wrong. The water flows backward. And your longship, gone. No charred wood, no broken oars, not even a scrap of sail. Just the memory of it. You camp one last time on a small hill above the water. You can see the forest from here. Not that it makes you feel safer. In the distance, just as night falls, you think you see movement. Figures, tall, slow, barefoot. No weapons, no faces. Just shapes moving between the trees, watching. You don't run. You don't scream. You just sit and wait. Eventually, you close your eyes. And if you wake the next morning, it will be because the forest let you. And that's why you wouldn't last a day in a Viking raid gone wrong. Because sometimes it wasn't swords or spears or shields that killed them. It was silence. It was mist. It was the land itself. And when the survivors came home, the few that did, they were quieter, slower. They didn't brag about what they saw. They didn't call it defeat. They called it something else. They called it cursed. Imagine yourself in Ireland. Not the Ireland of postcards and modern pubs, but an older Ireland, raw, windswept, half swallowed by the sea. It is the 9th century, and the island is not united. It is a patchwork of kingdoms, clans, holy places, and ancient sites. A land where the sacred and the ordinary overlap, where stones whisper and wells remember. You are walking through this landscape. The roads are little more than tracks, worn by hooves, prayer, and memory. The wind carries the scent of peat smoke and salt, and scattered across the hills stand the monasteries, not like you might expect, not grand cathedrals, not towering cities of stone, but clusters of beehive huts, dry stone walls, low stone chapels tucked into folds of green, surrounded by ring forts, thorn hedges, and the occasional standing cross etched with symbols, Christian and something older. These places are sanctuaries, places of learning, places of silence. But that silence was broken. It began with sails on the horizon, dark shapes on the eastern coast, Norse longships gliding into narrow inlets, hidden harbours, river mouths. The raiders came not for conquest, but for silver. And in Ireland, the silver was in the churches. Monasteries like Clonmacnoise, Glendalough, Iona, and Armagh, repositories of knowledge and devotion, became targets. They held relics, chalices, crosses, books inked in precious pigments, and men who did not fight. At first, the raids were fast, brutal, confusing. Vikings moved like smoke through the countryside, striking, vanishing, returning. And at first, the monks were helpless. They wrote about it in their annals. Great terror of the Northmen. They came to our lands like wolves, and the Lord was silent. But Ireland is not a land that stays silent for long, and her monks were not what the Vikings expected, because something strange began to happen. The raiders began to disappear. The stories began as whispers, among Norse crews huddled on unfamiliar coasts, men who spoke of cursed ground, of monasteries that never fell, of monks who walked barefoot through the bogs, carrying axes. They called them Culdays, from the Gaelic Sailor Day, companions of God. They were not kings, not warriors. They did not wear armor or carry war banners, but the land listened to them. They lived in solitude, in prayer cells in woods, on remote islands lashed by wind and sea. They followed strict disciplines, silence, fasting, sleeplessness. Some refused to lie down to sleep, believing it would soften the soul. And when the Vikings came, the Culdays did not run. They waited. There's one tale, half legend, half warning, of a Viking crew that landed near Lough Derg in Western Ireland. They had heard of a monastery there, isolated, poorly guarded, an easy raid. They disembarked at dawn. Fog rolled over the lake behind them. The trees were quiet, too quiet. They found no monastery, no huts, no smoke, just a narrow path leading into dense woodland, so they followed it. And there, deep in the trees, they found the ruins of a chapel, roofless, covered in moss. Within it stood a stone altar, and beside it, 3 men, old, barefoot, cloaked in rough wool. They did not run. They did not speak. One of the Norsemen stepped forward, raised his axe, and collapsed before he reached them. The others fled. No pursuit followed, just the sound of a single bell tolling through the trees. They left with nothing, and swore never to return. These stories grew. Among Norse raiders, Ireland became more than just a land of monks. It became a place of strange, holy resistance, where the priests didn't hide behind kings. They hid in the bogs and waited. Not all monks fought with blades. Some fought with stone. Because after the first waves of raiding, Irish monasteries began to change. They grew thicker walls, round towers, fortified rings of stone and earth. And not for beauty, not for pilgrimage, for defense. These were places of learning, yes, but also places prepared to endure siege. You can still see them today. Round towers that rise like sentinels above the misty fields. Narrow doorways raised high above the ground. No staircase, just a rope or ladder that could be pulled up. Once inside, monks could wait out a raid for days, sometimes weeks. And from up there, they could see the boats, count the raiders, signal to nearby communities. These weren't castles, but they weren't unguarded. The monks learned the rhythm of Viking movement, when the longships came, where they landed, how they moved inland. They began to coordinate, not as soldiers, but as something older, and in many ways more dangerous. They became guardians of memory, of sacred ground, of secrets. In one coastal abbey, now lost beneath ivy and stone, archaeologists found the remains of a scriptorium, a room where monks copied holy texts, but beneath the floor, a hidden chamber, inside weapons, axes, short spears, blades, not Norse but local, worn, well used. These weren't stockpiles for an army. They were last resorts. They suggest that even the most peaceful monks had a plan. And when the day came, they didn't beg for mercy. They lit the fires and waited behind the walls. The Norse called some places blessed. Others they called forbidden. And in Ireland, there were islands they would not land on. Even the boldest raiders sailed past them without stopping. These weren't places guarded by armies. They were guarded by something else. Take Skellig Michael, a jagged spike of stone rising out of the Atlantic, windswept, salt-stung, barely hospitable to goats, let alone people. But monks lived there. 600 feet above the sea, carved into terraces of rock, they built huts, dry stone cells that still stand, round like beehives, lashed by centuries of storms. They prayed there, fastened their lives to ritual and silence, slept little, ate less, no wealth, no walls, no treasure. Yet Viking raids never touched Skellig, not once. Why? Because even the Vikings, who prided themselves on fearlessness, believed there were places better left alone, not out of strategy, out of reverence or fear. Another tale tells of Inishmurray, off the northwest coast, a monastic island surrounded by massive dry stone ramparts, 5 meters thick in places. It had no army, no towers, but the walls weren't for defense alone. They were boundaries between this world and something else. It's said that when a Norse crew attempted to land there, they were driven back, not by men, but by the weather itself. A sudden storm. Waves rose unnaturally. Fog thickened into solid white. The shoreline disappeared. 3 of the ships wrecked. 1 man returned, and he swore they weren't monks, they were spirits. Of course, we can't verify those stories, but what matters isn't whether they were real. It's that the Vikings believed them. To understand the fear these monks inspired, you have to understand the Norse mind. They believed in power. Power in steel, in storms, in the favor of gods. They respected cunning, boldness, strength. But they also believed in spirits, in omens, in places where the worlds overlapped. And Ireland didn't play by normal rules. The Skalds, Norse poets, rarely spoke of Irish raids in their songs, not the ones that went wrong, not the ones where crews vanished. Instead, they left silence, gaps, or buried the details in metaphors. They spoke of veiled coasts, of swords that could not find purchase, of hunger striking before the first blow, Of men who went ashore and came back? Wrong. These weren't tales of glory. They were warnings. Some Norse traders, years later, described dark priests who could command the land, who moved through the fog without sound, who stared at you without blinking, and knew your name. One tale tells of a raid on a small chapel in Connaught. Only 3 monks were there. The Norsemen tied them up, burned the church, took what little silver they found. But by the time they reached their ship, the sea had vanished. The bay where they landed, dry. The water had pulled back, impossibly far, exposing rocks that should never be visible. They waited for the tide to return. It did. All at once. None survived. Even if you doubt the tale, you can feel the shape of the fear it left behind. Because for the Norse, this was something new. Not a war they could win, but a place they could lose themselves in. There's a moment in every story when the tide turns, and for the Norse in Ireland, that moment came quietly. Not with a great battle, not with a hero, but with exhaustion and whispers. Some scholars believe it was the rise of Irish kings who struck back, like Brian Boru. Others credit weather, trade, geography. But among the Norse themselves, the stories say it was something else. There's an old Norse account, fragmented, copied centuries later, that speaks of a fleet that vanished on the Shannon River. 7 ships, 200 men. They set out under clear skies, well-armed, experienced. They passed several monasteries, one burned, one looted, one ignored. Then they reached a small island, nameless, unmarked. A single stone chapel stood there, no walls, no treasure. Just a cross carved into the rock, a bell hanging from a crooked frame. They approached, and something changed. The wind shifted. The men began to argue. Some turned on each other. Others jumped into the water without cause. By the time the last ship reached open sea, it carried only 3 survivors. And none of them ever raided again. They swore off Ireland entirely. And for a time, the raid stopped. You can believe the stories or not. But even today, in the moss-covered ruins of Ireland's early monasteries, there's a sense that something endured, something watched and waited, and made the hunters feel hunted, not with swords, but with silence. Imagine a city, not one of timber and huts, but of stone, tall towers, bell ringers, bridges strong enough to hold carts and cavalry, a city with gates that close and stay closed. You are floating just beyond it now, on the Seine River. The year is 885, and your fleet stretches for half a mile. 1,000 men, maybe more. This is not a raid. This is a siege. You've come to sack Paris. The city should be easy. You've heard it's soft, ruled by a Frankish emperor with more wine than wisdom. The last time Norse ships came here, decades ago, they were paid to leave. This time you expect more. Gold, food, captives, glory. And at first, it seems like it might be so. You arrive in late autumn. The air smells of wood smoke and damp leaves. The city walls are high, yes, but your men are experienced. Many of them were born into war. The gates close, bells ring, crossbow bolts rain down from towers. But you do not flinch. You camp, you prepare, and you wait. What you do not realize, not yet, is that this siege will last nearly a year, and that the city you see before you is a fortress built to bleed you dry. It begins with confidence. You've seen walls like these before, even taller ones. But walls can burn. Stone cracks, gates splinter, and Paris, you think, is no different. Your fleet anchors along both sides of the Seine, surrounding the Ile de la Cité, the fortified island at the city's heart. From your boat, you can see the towers of the Grand Pont and Petit Pont, the two stone bridges connecting the island to the riverbanks. They are narrow, choke points, perfect targets. At the head of your army stands a chieftain named Siegfried, tall, broad, with years of blood behind him. Some call him a king, others a mercenary. But in this moment, he is your war leader. You land in the early days of November. Cold wind lashes the sails. Your warriors are wrapped in thick cloaks, furs damp from the river spray. You call out demands, surrender, tribute. Open your gates and spill your treasure. Inside the city, the response is clear. A bell tolls, loud, defiant, followed by the hiss of arrows from the towers. No deal. So the siege begins. First, you target the bridges. If you can take them, you can choke the city. Isolate it, starve it. You launch fire arrows, pitch-soaked bundles, and crude siege carts. But the bridges hold. They were built not just for beauty, but for this very purpose. And at the base of each bridge stands a massive tower, stone-faced, reinforced, manned day and night by defenders who know you're coming. You try scaling the walls. They pour boiling oil. You use battering rams. They drop stones the size of ox heads. You try to burn the towers. But November rain never stops falling. Still, you press on. You build floating platforms, lash boats together to create siege barges. One night, your men manage to break through the outer palisade on the right bank. They pillage a nearby abbey, set fires, capture grain. It feels like a victory, but it is only the edge of the city. The walls remain. The towers still watch. And inside, Paris tightens its grip. Winter comes, and with it, the rot. At first, it's the meat that turns. You've brought supplies, yes, but not enough. The cattle you slaughtered during the march up the Seine are gone. Now, fish pulled from the river taste wrong. The water has thickened. By January, men begin to fall sick, not from wounds, from the cold, from hunger, from the unclean wounds festering on their legs and hands. Then the rains return. They do not stop. Tents collapse. Pits fill with water. The damp becomes a second skin. And Paris still stands. You hear singing from inside the walls. Monks, women, children. You begin to wonder, how do they still have hope? But Paris has something you do not. A leader. Count Odo. A nobleman, yes, but one who fights. He moves between the towers, leads counterattacks, directs archers, organizes supplies. He's been wounded more than once, you hear the rumors, but still he stands. He becomes a symbol, and in war symbols matter. More than numbers, more than gold. In February you try again, this time with full force. All ships, all men. A final push to take the city before the spring floods. But Paris doesn't break. Your men are thrown back from the towers like waves against rock. A battering ram collapses under its own weight. Dozens die trying to ford the flooded banks. And when the fighting stops, the ground is slick with rain and blood. And still, the gates are closed. At night, men speak in hushed tones. Not about victory, but about escape. Not about treasure, but about survival. And somewhere upstream, you hear rumors. A Frankish army is coming. A new emperor. One who might not negotiate. You fought many battles, but never against time itself. And here, it is slipping away. By spring, the Seine no longer carries promises. It carries filth, dead animals, wreckage, and the smell of unwashed bodies packed together for months. Your camp is no longer a war camp. It's a city of decay. Every morning, you step out of your tent and see fewer men standing. Some have slipped away into the woods. Some have died quietly in the night. Others are just fading. There's no more laughter, no more boasting. The schools who once sang of glory now sit in silence, sharpening rusting blades. You've begun rationing salt meat, boiling water twice, sleeping with a dagger at your chest, not for battle, but in case one of your own tries to steal from you. Men sharpen their axes and mutter about omens. One claims to have seen ravens land on the mast of the late longship and not fly away. Another found a cross in the mud, its face blackened by fire, but the arm still whole. They speak of bad luck, of cursed land. They begin to speak not of siege, but of punishment. And still, Paris stands. Inside, the bells continue to toll. You've heard, through traders, through prisoners, that the people inside are starving too, but they refuse to yield. They've made oaths, the kind of oaths that don't break when bread runs out. Count Odo rides out more than once, not to parley, but to harass your forces. He fords the river with a small force of Frankish knights, strikes your outposts, sets fires, disappears back into the city. It's not a victory, it's worse. It's a reminder. They still have fight. You are starting to forget what that feels like. You hold a war council. Siegfried, your leader, stands in the center. His beard is tangled, grayer than when you left the coast. He's lost weight. His voice is hoarse, but his eyes still burn. He wants to stay, wants to finish what was started. Paris was supposed to fall, and a king who returns empty-handed is not a king for long. Others disagree. They speak of Charles the Fat, the Frankish emperor. He's coming, they say, with reinforcements, a real army, and if he traps your fleet here, there will be no escape. Tensions flare. Axes are drawn, not against the Franks, but between your own. In the end, Siegfried stands firm. We stay, he says, or we die nameless. You stay, and the dying continues. By midsummer, rot is in everything. Tents are patched with sailcloth. Wounds no longer heal. Insects rise in clouds from shallow graves. The stench rolls off the river like fog. You dream of things you haven't seen in months. Clean snow, bread, the sea. The men are hollow-eyed, gaunt, coughing. Some wear bits of Frankish clothing taken from skirmishes. Some speak of deserting to local villages, taking wives, vanishing into the hills. Some take their own lives. There are no hymns for them, only silence. Then, one evening, the sky changes. The sun sets in a smear of red, and on the horizon, banners, hundreds. The army has come, but not to fight, to negotiate. The banners rise slowly over the far bank of the Seine, bright against the smoke-stained sky. Blue, red, gold, the colors of a kingdom trying to remember what it was before the raiders came. But the man leading them, not a hero, not a warrior. He is Charles the Fat, emperor by name, descendant of Charlemagne, ruler of the fragmented Carolingian realm. His army is real, well equipped, but they are not here to fight. Charles has studied the siege. He's heard the cost. He knows Paris still stands, but only barely. He knows you're bleeding too, and so, rather than crush you with steel, He opens his coffers. In a council tent on the river's edge, the terms are laid out. Charles offers gold, thousands of pounds of it, in exchange for your departure. He will not chase you. He will not avenge the fallen. He only asks that you leave Paris alone, and that you go attack Burgundy instead. Yes, he's paying you and pointing you elsewhere. Among the Norse, it's divisive. Some see it as a triumph. You see, they say, even kings kneel before us. We name the price. But others, especially those who remember the brothers lost in the mud, the men buried in unmarked pits, the dreams turned to mildew and ash, they say nothing. They just watch the city, still standing, still defiant. You know what your skalds will say in the sagas. We came, we besieged, we were paid. But inside you feel the truth. You didn't win, you endured. And that is not the same. The fleet prepares to move. Boats are patched, axes cleaned, gold distributed. But you notice something different in the air. A weight, a quiet. No celebration, no songs, no boasting around the fire. Even Siegfried seems smaller now. He takes his share and departs, not north, but east. You never hear from him again. A smaller king, one who had joined your warband weeks earlier, is found dead 2 days before departure. Some say illness, others poison. He died in his tent, alone, clutching a silver cross he'd taken from one of Paris's churches. His crew burns his ship in silence. No words, just smoke. The Seine carries his ashes downstream, past the walls he never climbed. And so, it ends. Not with a bang, but with the slow, quiet scrape of oars against river water, the slow pull of ropes, the slow drift back into the mist. Paris watches you go. Its bells toll again, not in mourning, but in warning. You look back once, at the towers, at the broken bridge, at the gate that never opened, and in your bones, you understand something most men never will. Victory is not always louder than defeat. Sometimes it just takes longer to rot. The Seine is quiet now. The longships have vanished. The smoke has lifted. The bells have fallen silent. But the memory lingers, not just in Paris, but across all of Europe. Because something changed here. Not in a moment, not with a treaty or a sword, but slowly, like a fever that finally breaks. For the people of Paris, the siege became a legend. Children would grow up hearing of Count Odo, the noble who rode out against impossible odds, who refused to let the gates fall. They spoke of hunger turned to courage, of rain-soaked days filled with prayer and desperation, of barricades held not with iron, but with stubbornness. The round towers were repaired, the bridges strengthened, the river watched more carefully, and Odo, he would one day become king, not by bloodline, not by imperial succession, but by loyalty, by grit, because when the emperor chose gold over glory, it was Odo who stayed. As for the Norse, they never forgot. They didn't speak of Paris with the same pride as they did Lindisfarne, or York, or the raids along the Baltic coast. Paris became a different kind of story, a lesson whispered around firelight, that not every city burns, that some walls bend but do not break, that sometimes the prize isn't worth the siege. Many of the survivors of that long, bitter year drifted into mercenary work. Others settled. Some never raided again. They remembered the hunger, the rot, the bridges that bled their comrades dry, and perhaps most haunting of all, they remembered what it felt like to be denied. Years later, when Norsemen returned to Paris under different flags, they did so with more care. Sometimes as traders, sometimes as hired swords, but never again in such force, never again with such blind ambition. Because Paris, the one that didn't fall, had done what few other places could. It changed how the Vikings saw themselves. Archaeologists would later find remnants of the siege, arrowheads, charred timber buried beneath river mud, scraps of Norse chainmail in ruined outposts beyond the walls. One ring was found with runes carved on the inside, the name lost to corrosion, but still legible in shape. It had been buried beside the bones of a man with no grave. Not a Parisian, a Viking, perhaps one of the many who died not with a sword in hand, but with fever in his blood and doubt in his heart. The siege didn't end with fire. It ended with endurance. And in the cold logic of history, that is often the heavier weight. After the siege, Europe did not suddenly become safe. Raids continued, in England, in Ireland, along the Baltic. But something had shifted. The siege of Paris wasn't just a failed attack, it was a revelation. It showed that the Viking model, fast strikes, intimidation, silver for silence, had limits. It showed that cities could adapt, that kings, even weak ones, could resist with the right allies, and that hunger was as dangerous as any army. And for the Norse, it was a wake-up call. In the years that followed, more Viking leaders turned toward settlement. Not conquest exactly, but colonization. They began to found towns, not just camps. They married local women, adopted parts of the Christian faith, if only to secure trade. They became landowners, dukes, counts, and eventually they became kings. But the shadow of Paris lingered. Every time a longship approached a fortified town, the men remembered. They remembered the winter tents soaked in rot, the arrows that fell like rain from towers that wouldn't fall, the bodies piled near broken siege carts, the promises made and broken. Paris didn't just survive the siege, it scarred the men who led it. Charles the Fat, for all his titles, did not remain powerful for long. Though he paid off the Vikings, his subjects were less forgiving. He was deposed just a few years later. Odo, the man who had fought for Paris, took the crown in his place. It was the beginning of something new, a shift in how power moved, away from bloodlines toward deeds, and it marked the slow, painful disintegration of the old Carolingian Empire. The Norse would remember this too. They saw that kings could fall, even without a sword at their throat, and perhaps they saw, for the first time, that time itself was a weapon, that cities could outlast fleets, that people, if united, could wear down even the fiercest foe. The Vikings had come to take, but they left with something else. A story they couldn't quite finish, a city that wouldn't die, and a question they would never quite answer. What does it mean to be strong if you still must leave in the end? Years pass. You're older now, no longer rowing, no longer raiding. The axe you once swung so easily now leans untouched beside your hearth. The scars on your hands are pale, your beard touched with white. And sometimes, in the long silence between stories, you think of Paris, not the gold, not the towers, the sound, the silence of 1,000 men huddled in the mud, the hiss of rain on oiled leather, the dull thud of arrows against wood, the toll of a bell that refused to stop. You dream of it sometimes. The bridges that never fell, the stone gate that would not open, the taste of spoiled meat, the fog lifting over the island and revealing the same unbroken walls. You remember how the fires wouldn't light, how the wounded stopped crying after a while, how the sky never cleared, and how the city, broken, starving, desperate, simply refused to move, to fall, to give you what you wanted. You've seen other cities burn, but this one endured. And deep down, a quiet truth remains. It wasn't your swords that lost. It was your certainty. You believed no wall could stop you. No king could deny you. No river could hold you back. But Paris did all three. Now, by firelight, your sons ask you what happened. You tell them about the siege. You say, we took gold. You say, the emperor feared us. You say, we won. But your voice lacks something. Conviction, maybe, or pride. And in the space between your words, they hear it. The weight of a story that still presses on your chest. And in Paris, the bells still ring. Softly now, not in warning, in memory of a time when the city stood alone and said, no. Imagine yourself deep in the east, past the rivers of Rus, beyond the trade routes, where the pine forests grow thick and ancient, and the language changes in your mouth. This is not England, not Francia, not even the Ireland that haunted your dreams. This is the Slavic frontier, the lands of the Polans, the Drevlians, the Vietici, peoples without kings, where alliances shift with the snow and rivers never flow the same way twice. You are a trader this time, not a raider, not a conqueror. Your ship is smaller. Your beard is longer. You carry bolts of cloth, beads, fine steel. You travel by river, always by river. Because in the forests, there are stories. The Rus, Norse settlers who came east, speak in low tones of women in the woods. Not queens, not witches, something else. They call them Vedmi, Volkvi, Znakaki. The words don't translate cleanly, but they mean power, hidden power. They are healers, diviners, priestesses of the old gods. They wear claws around their necks, paint their faces with ash. They live alone, or in small bands, always on the edge of the village, or just beyond it. And they are feared, not for what they do, but for what they know. The Norse call them Seidkona, in their own tongue, women of prophecy. But these women don't work from high halls or sacred groves. They work in shadow, in forest dens, in silence, and they know your name before you speak it. You arrive at a riverside village. It's small, a few thatched huts, smoke curling from chimneys, livestock tethered near reed-lined banks. Children watch from behind wooden fences. The men do not greet you first. The women do. One steps forward, older, but not frail. Her hair is bound in braids threaded with bone and copper. Her eyes do not flinch. She asks no price. She simply tells you, do not stay past moonrise. You nod, but you stay anyway. That night the fire burns low. The villagers are quiet, too quiet. They do not drink. They do not sing. They whisper among themselves in a dialect you do not understand. And when you look around, the old woman is gone. The next morning, your crew finds footprints in the frost, barefoot. Leading from the edge of the village into the trees, you follow them. Not far, just beyond the last hut, in a clearing overgrown with moss and thistle, stands a stone, flat-topped, worn smooth, streaked with rust-red lines that might be paint or something else. Around it, feathers, bones, burned herbs, a ritual place. Your men fall silent. One mutters a prayer, Not to Odin, not to Thor, but something older, something he can't name. The villagers say little, but one boy, no more than 8, tells you a story about a woman in the woods with eyes like a hawk, who walks without sound, who speaks to wolves, and who once made a man's blood turn black with a single word. You laugh, but it's a nervous laugh, because something about this place listens. And that night, one of your crew vanishes. His name was Einar, a quiet man, steady, not the kind to get lost easily. The night before, he said he needed air. The fire smoke was thick in the tent. He stepped out, and that was the last anyone saw of him. No sound, no struggle, no call for help, just gone. You searched the banks at first, then the tree line, then deeper into the brush and the ferns, calling his name. The locals do not help. They only shake their heads. He saw something, one of them says. You ask what? They will not say. But one woman leaves a bundle near your boat, a pouch of herbs, a carved wooden charm, a spiral wrapped in what looks like birch bark. You ask what it's for, she says, so they know you don't mean harm. The they is never explained, but you understand. You've heard stories like this before, usually in passing, around winter fires in Kiev, or in Novgorod, or on the northern Volga routes. Stories of women who live between breath and shadow, who appear where the woods are thickest, who know things they should not. Some call them guardians, others witches, still others simply them, no name, only reverence. The Rus traders call them Volkvi, prophets, shamans, wise women. They're not leaders, but no one crosses them. And when they speak, even the bravest men listen. Some of your crew say Einar wandered too far, that the woods took him. Others say she came for him, the one with the painted eyes, the one they saw just once, standing in the fog on the ridge above the camp, hands outstretched, palms painted red. They didn't see her move. She was there. And then she wasn't. And that night, no one leaves the fire, no one sleeps, and no one speaks Einar's name. Not anymore. You don't stay long in the village. You collect your trade goods, load your boat, and make quiet farewells. No one stops you. No one asks you to stay. In fact, you sense a quiet relief as your oars hit the water. But the forest doesn't let go so easily. As you push off, the trees seem to lean closer. The wind doesn't howl, it whispers. And somewhere in that whisper, you think you hear a voice, not calling, reciting. 2 nights downriver, you camp again, on a quiet bend, far from any village. You light no fire this time. Not because you can't, because something in you says, don't. The forest here is thicker. The moonlight barely reaches the ground, and the birds are silent. That night, another man dreams. He wakes screaming, clawing at his own chest, as if trying to dig something out. You calm him. You give him water. He stares into the trees and says, "She spoke my name." You ask him who. He doesn't answer. Later, as the others sleep, you sit by the water, watching the mist rise. And there, across the river, standing perfectly still, is a figure. Slender, shrouded, unmoving. You don't wake the others. You don't move at all. You just watch. And after a while, she fades back into the trees. You leave before dawn. In the next village, the elders welcome you cautiously. They offer bread, cheese, and fire. They ask few questions. But when you mention what you saw upriver, One of the old women goes very still. She nods once and says, "You met a Vedma." Then she looks to the others and mutters a phrase you don't understand. The room goes quiet. They tell you, slowly, carefully, that some women are born to serve the land, not rule it, not command it, but to guard it, speak for it, remember it. They say these women feel the dead in the wind, know when rivers change their course, can call illness or banish it. And they say, when strangers like you forget to ask permission, they come, not to kill, just to remind you that not all things are yours to touch. You finish your meal in silence, and when you leave, they give you another charm, a small bone carved with a spiral, this one still warm. Years later, you sit in a long hall, far north, snow pressing against the walls. The fire crackles, mead passes from hand to hand. The skald begins a story of the east, of the forests, of the rivers lined with skulls, and the women who walk where no man dares. And as he speaks, you feel it again, that silence, that watching. And you remember Einar, you remember the red hands, the bones in the moss, the spirals carved in places no one visits twice. You tell the younger men the story, not with pride, not as a warning even, but as a kind of confession. You were not beaten in battle. You were not cursed by gods. You simply went too far, into a place that was not yours, and met someone who didn't need armor to stop you. In Novgorod, you once saw a scroll, written by a Rus monk, a convert, they said, but one who still kept the old ways hidden beneath his robes. The scroll listed tribes, customs, rituals, and near the bottom, a passage you never forgot. In the forests east of the Dnieper, there are women who wear no crown, serve no prince, but whose word binds wind and man alike. The Norse call them Sederborn. The Slavs do not name them. Beside that line a mark, blackened by soot. The edge of the parchment was burned, deliberately. You asked the monk why. He said nothing, just shook his head and touched the charm at his neck. The memory stayed with you. Not just the scroll, not just the forest, but the look in his eyes, as if saying her name was enough to bring her. The skald finishes his story. The fire burns low, and outside, in the darkness, the wind shifts, just slightly. You try not to say their names anymore, not out of superstition, not exactly, but because there's something in you, something older than belief, that warns against it. A voice that says, the forest remembers. Still, the stories keep spreading. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, Norse traders passed tales of strange women glimpsed at the edges of their travels. A woman in white standing motionless beside a burning shrine. A girl with black eyes who walked into the river and did not return, but whose voice could still be heard for days. A priestess who laughed during a plague and was the only one to survive. You hear a new name, Zoria. Some say she is one of the Vedmi. Others say she is something older, a night spirit, a guardian of the threshold between dream and death. Some claim she led a group of women into the hills above Kiev, carrying curved blades and singing in a language no man could understand. The men who followed them vanished. Only their horses returned, wild-eyed, trembling, marked with red paint across their flanks. You ask where the story came from. No one knows, but everyone believes it. One winter, in a village near the Carpathians, a wise man tells you plainly, they are not spirits, they are not gods. They are what waits. You ask him, waits for what? He shrugs. and says, for someone to forget. The most hardened Norse warriors, men who cross seas, raze cities, face berserker rages, would not enter certain woods without offerings. Not for gods, not for kings. For them, dried herbs, small bones, blood from a finger prick. Just a token, just enough, because sometimes that was all it took. And so their memory endures, not on runestones, not in scrolls, not in the sagas passed down to lords and jarls, but in the things no one dares write down, in fires that burn just a little too blue, in forests that grow quiet when you pass, and in the feeling that someone is watching you from just beyond the edge of the clearing. You return home eventually. Your axe still hangs at your side. Your beard is longer, your voice quieter. You've seen fortresses burn, felled men twice your size, crossed seas black with ice, but none of it stays with you, not like her, not like that place, not like the silence in the trees. Years later, in a longhouse warmed by age and fire, a child asks you, "Did you ever see magic?" You pause. The others laugh, old comrades, their hands wrapped around horns of ale, still telling tales of raids and gods. But you don't laugh. You look toward the rafters, where smoke curls like mist, where shadows stretch like roots, and you say, yes, then nothing more. Because how do you explain it? How do you explain a glance that freezes blood? A whisper that rots a wound? A presence that doesn't follow you, but walks beside you? How do you speak of women who carried no blades, but made armies disappear? You can't, so you just remember. And when you set out again, one last time, your pack is light, but you carry something small. A bone, carved with a spiral, wrapped in birch bark. A gift from a village long since gone. You keep it with you, not for protection, but for permission. Because even now, after all the battles, you still believe what you saw. That the most dangerous force in those distant woods was not fire, or sword, or storm. It was a woman, standing still, saying nothing, watching you leave. And so, we come to the end. Tonight's story began with fire and steel, with the thunder of longships, and the confidence of warriors who thought they could not be stopped. But what we found was silence, was patience, was a resistance that didn't shout, but whispered. You followed the Norse through dark rivers and frozen gates, through monasteries that answered with axes, through towers that would not fall, and into forests where no blade could help them. And maybe now you see what they saw, that not every battle is won by strength. Some are won by endurance, by conviction, by knowing when to wait and when to simply refuse. As you drift off, remember, there were places the Vikings never returned to, not because they couldn't, but because something deep inside them said, don't. And that's what makes history more than dates or wars. It's the memory left behind, in bells that still ring, in scrolls turned to ash, in the feeling that not everything is meant to be touched. Thank you for sailing with me tonight. If this story helped you find rest, consider giving it a like or subscribing for more. But for now, let the wind settle, let the drums fade, and let the forest close behind you. Until next time, friend.